Hey guys, welcome back to Bible Fun with the Nuns. Today we're studying Amos chapter 3. Let's get started.
Okay, so in the book of Amos, Amos is a shepherd, okay? So he starts out as a shepherd, but then God calls him to be a prophet. Now what we find to be interesting is that in the middle of this whole mix, Amos carries one of the heaviest messages of any of the prophets. Everything Amos has to say is geared towards sin. And Amos is a guy who is a country preacher who has got little words and little time for frills, for a whole lot of like niceties. He's going to tell it like it is. I like Amos because of that. One of the things I really enjoy about Amos is kind of the same thing I like about Micah. It's that when God calls out these guys to be prophets, God calls these guys out and by using them, by using a shepherd from the field and by using people kind of from unknown places and unknown times, is showing us that God doesn't need celebrities. God needs people who are willing to just tell the truth. Now, in all of this, Amos wants people to understand how crazy their behavior is. Look in verse 1. He says, "Hear this word that the Lord has spoken against you, O children of Israel." So now he's talking to the home folks. He's talking to the home team. He's talking to people who ought to know better. He says, against the whole family. These are not foreigners, these are family. Against the whole family which I brought up out of the land of Egypt. So, in essence, what Amos is saying, he says redeemed people are also responsible people. That redeemed people are responsible to the Redeemer. And after all that God has done in their lives, of all of Israel's history and their personal relationship with God, it makes their sin not just sinful, it makes it crazy. Why in the world would people who have a relationship with God abandon the privilege they have and the responsibility they have of walking with the one who delivered them? So no other nation at this season had known God the way Israel had done. And what we're finding out, to those who had been given so much, now a lot is required. Now, John, what were the questions that Amos asked all these people?
So in verse 3 and all the way to verse 6, he said, "Can two walk together without agreeing to meet? Does a lion roar in the forest when it has no prey? Does a young lion growl from its lair unless it has captured something? Does a bird land in a trap on the ground if there is no bait for it? Does a trap spring from the ground when it has caught nothing? If a ram's horn is blown in a city, aren't people afraid? If disaster occurs in a city, hasn't the Lord done it?" And so the answer to all of these questions is no. And yeah. And so my takeaway kind of comes from how God, he was telling the prophets, hey, y'all are going to get in trouble because of all the sin that y'all have done. And the prophets have been telling the people, hey, we're going to get in trouble because of all the sin that we've been doing. And so they knew that they were going to get in trouble, but they just ignored it and kept sinning. And so when the disaster happens, they shouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, it's kind of like what we talked about Sunday morning when we talked about Joel. Joel had talked to the people about why all these things were happening to them, and it wasn't happening to them in a out of nowhere. This was discipline from God, and the idea is that, and I even said this Sunday morning. Our problem is not usually that we don't know that what we're doing is putting us out of fellowship with God. Our problem is often that either that we don't care or we're not willing to do anything about it. And so when Amos is saying, hey, can two walk together unless they're agreed? The answer is no. Will a lion roar in the forest when he has no prey? No. Why? The logic of this is that when Israel's disaster and discipline arrives, it won't be out of nowhere. It will be a natural reaction, a natural consequence of their sin. You see, a lot of times we feel like we can't, there's a whole lot of things we can't control in our lives. But the reality is there are some things, some decisions we ought to be making because they just make sense. But sin, when we know better, sin doesn't fall in that category. Sin does not make sense when we know God. So why are we doing it? The thing that I got out of this was just this one piece of like verse 3. Can two walk together unless they're agreed? Well, now here's the thing. The answer to Amos's question there is no. Okay? So I just kind of started thinking about that all day with this one thing, and I journaled a lot about it. It was that, what do I want out of this day? I want to. My body needs, my soul needs, my mind needs, my heart needs. I need to walk with God. I need to walk with God more than I need food and water. I need to walk with God more than I need air in my lungs. I need to walk with God more than I need anything in the world. And so the question is, can two walk together unless they be agreed? The answer is no. And so if I need to walk with God more than I need anything else, then in order to walk with God, I got to be agreed with God. Here's the kicker though. If ever I have an opinion and God has an opinion and our opinions are not in line and we're not walking together because we're not agreed, who's right and who's wrong?
God's right and you're wrong.
God's right and I'm wrong. So that God isn't the one that has to change, I'm the one that's got to change. I think that whenever we read through the story of Amos, we're reading through what he has to tell the people. It's moments like this where we have to look up and go, if our desire is to walk with God, we cannot walk together with God unless we agree with God on what God says. And if what God says is not something I agree with, then the one that's got to change is me, and I want to change. This is one of those things where the psalmist would say, Lord, give me clean hands and a pure heart, and show me if there is any wicked way in me. Listen, if I'm not walking with God, it's because there is wicked way in me. And I'm going to tell you, I think at the end of the day, we need to be looking at this and say, we want to walk with God, so we need to make sure our life is in agreement with Him. That's what we're getting from Amos. Hope you're enjoying this. We'll see you tomorrow in chapter number 4. Bye.